Hello everyone and welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about The Boys Season 4, which just came to a close with the season finale earlier today, and I'm really excited to talk about this show because, I've had a very, let's say, conflicted relationship with this show for, the past 4 seasons. Not in the sense that, I think that there's really anything bad from a creative standpoint of this show. I love the writing. I think this is one of the best written shows. I love the characters for the most part. I love the biting satire that this show has that can be incredibly real a lot of the time, especially when it comes to this season and the fact that there's a lot that happened in this season that is a little bit too close to reality, but I think it is the exhausting nature of how it can be a little bit too close to real life, and it's a more cynical take on our real life, which reality is cynical to begin with. And so there's something so exhausting about this show for me as an audience member that makes me so glad this is a week-by-week show, because if this was all dropped at once and I had to binge it, I don't know if I could handle it, especially with even just the last week that we've had here in the United States, let alone the last 8 years that we've had while this show has been running. It's been a journey with this show for me, and I'm very excited to get into this. So let's talk about spoilers for The Boys Season 4. I'm going to be talking about the finale, but just the show in general and all the characters and how I thought their arcs went this season. So if you haven't got a chance to watch this season, definitely go check it out. I know it can be a very exhausting show to watch, and it's definitely not going to be for everybody because of the nature of the cynical, tone that this show can have, but let's just jump right into this thing. So I want to break the show down by character. So let's start off with Karl Urban as Billy Butcher, and this is a character that I've loved since the very beginning. I think there's some characters, which I'll get into in a second, that's, especially in the first couple of seasons, they really drove me crazy, but there's always something really fun about watching Billy Butcher on screen leading the boys, and the way that he leads the boys and his accent and the way that Karl Urban plays his character has always been fun. And his character in this season, I think, was a little bit of a little sidestep from what we've expected from him this entire time, because he has the illness that he has, this little brain tumor in him from the V that he used in the last season, and he's dealing with this, and he's having these delusions, and he's kind of off on the side from the boys, and he's really struggling with the angel and devil on his shoulders. I found his character to be a more of a side character in this season than the forefront focus that he's been in, especially the past 2 seasons. And so when it comes to Billy Butcher in this season, I did like what they did with him for the most part, and I do think it sets him up at a really great point for the next season. And that just kind of leaves me with this character being, fine. I thought his role in the season was fine. And with Butcher's storyline in this season in particular, you had a couple people that were just intrinsically tied with his role in this season, just contained within itself. So you have Grace, who did die in this finale episode that we just got here, which, Grace has been a character that has been throughout, that was a death that was really heartbreaking, especially when you have the whole character of Ryan, who is also very much tied to the storyline of Butcher this season, when you have Butcher's entire motivation, basically from the very beginning, at least when he figured out that Ryan existed, when he found out his wife was alive, and then the whole storyline happened in season 2, and they have season 3 with him, trying to get into good graces with his son, and now you have a tug of war game with Butcher and Homelander, pulling Ryan back and forth to the light side or the dark side. And I found that, the entire dynamic between these characters, especially in this finale, was really, really well done. Although I think Grace just really pushed it way too far, to a point where, Ryan did end up killing her, and his reaction to that being exactly as emotionless as, Homelander has been throughout the entirety of the series is extremely heartbreaking. But to go along with the whole tug of war metaphor, you also have, Billy Butcher having the angel and devil on his shoulder, essentially being his wife as the angel, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan as the devil, essentially on his shoulder. I think a lot of people predicted the fact that he was, not an actual person. He didn't actually exist, to a point where if you go back to the beginning of the season and you watch it, they never cheated. Jeffrey Dean Morgan's character never interacts with anybody except for Billy Butcher, and so that all works here. But I only found his character to be interesting after that reveal, because it seemed kind of obvious. You saw this character just kind of giving some comments here or there, but it became so much more interesting when he was able to let loose and truly be, the Venom type of character, because you have this parasite that's inside of his head, this tumor that has this very Venom-like abilities where it's coming out of him and attacking people, and he killed Neuman with this ability. And so you have this character being Jeffrey Dean Morgan, doing his Jeffrey Dean Morgan things, telling him to do all these terrible things, telling him to kill Ryan, and telling him to, go against the boys and to do all these terrible things, while you have his wife telling him that he needs to show empathy, that he needs to, try to get Ryan out in a safe way. And I love the fact that, Billy really did take a step in a different direction this season to be a lot more empathetic, especially when it came to how he interacted with Ryan in this season, especially those intimate moments inside of his home where they're just playing games and bonding in a way that you really never got to see Butcher act in this way, especially because of how hardened and how, traumatized this character has been throughout his entire life. And so it's a nice little different side of Butcher that we rarely ever get to see. And so I thought that, in general, Karl Urban had a lot to play with in this season, just off on the side, but I did miss him as the leader of the boys. Laz Alonso, on the other hand, got to be the leader of the boys. He got to take a step forward this season, which I really do love. I love as a character, and I thought everything that he had to do as a leader in his struggle of being a leader and to, try to have that balance of, doing the right thing that he wants to do at the beginning of the season, to have to, put his foot down and to get into the dirty work of how to lead this team in general as the season progressed was a lot of fun to see. And just in general, Laz Alonso was great in this show just from the very beginning, and his presence, especially him taking a forefront in this season, was also great to see. And I think the storyline with that I loved the most out of this season was, the struggle with him wanting to just run away and just leave it all behind to go with his ex-wife and his daughter to safety, because there is a desperate want for these characters to be safe, to go out and just, take everything away, to strip it all down and just live their lives and to not care about all these terrible things that are happening in the world in the way that, a lot of these superheroes do in this series, like A-Train specifically. I love the fact that they tied getting A-Train to turn in this season, which I thought was a great storyline. When you have two characters that could easily run away and just ignore being a hero, but then you have both these characters kind of learn to take that step forward, and decides to not go with his family and to do what is right, because that is the type of person that he is. He's not just going to run away. And then you have A-Train on the other hand, who learns how to be a hero again. I love that they, redeemed A-Train in this season, especially when it came to even Hughie, forgiving him from the very beginning, which led a lot of people to believe that A-Train was going to die this season. I'm honestly shocked that they didn't kill A-Train in this season, him being the leak and doing all the things that he did throughout the entirety of this season. I'm very glad that they still have him in their back pocket to use in the final season. I really hope they get to use him in a very fun way, along with Maeve, who also kind of got a happy ending in season 3, which I honestly kind of hope that they don't go back to Maeve. I really like that they gave her a happy ending. If she never comes back ever again, I'll be very satisfied with that as well. But A-Train specifically, I like the fact that he got room to be a hero, and I love the fact that was the one who was able to get him there. You also have Karen Fukuhara and Tomer Capone as Frenchie and KIMIKO, who have always been a highlight in this show, and I think that their storylines in this season was probably the weakest for me of the bunch, mainly because I think Frenchie in general, they just didn't really have a lot for him to do this season, because they gave him this whole storyline with Colin and the love story that he had there, and how he killed his family, and so he has all these conflicting things, and it just made Frenchie look like a really terrible person this season to even let himself get into that situation to begin with. And the fact that he turned himself in just kind of left him as very much in the background of this season, which gave him a storyline that I didn't really care about. You also had the whole KIMIKO storyline with her, and what happened with her past, which just kind of felt a little bit like a reach out of what we've seen with her in the previous seasons as well. And so both these characters I don't think really got a lot to shine, but I will say in the finale, I love the fact that these characters finally came together and had that moment in the end where they actually got together in a relationship. I love the fact that they went that direction with these characters that's they've been kind of teasing throughout this entire show, and I think this is a great point to end these characters, because we're going into our final season here with season 5, and so let's stop dancing around this idea and let's just go for it. And that is how they ended off these characters at the end of this season. And what I loved even more so about KIMIKO's storyline, especially in this finale episode, is KIMIKO has always been a silent killer. She's been a badass throughout this entire thing, and when you have the quick flashes of all the cliffhangers that they're going to leave for season 5, and you see the Gen V kids drop down out of nowhere and kidnap them and make Frenchie go off, be mind controlled, which also has to be really traumatizing for this character who did all these terrible things by the bidding of other people, has finally, I guess, forgiven himself for that and accepted that he can deserve somebody like KIMIKO, just for him to be mind controlled once again, to be taken away. That's just going to be heartbreaking for next season. But what was even more impressive is the fact that KIMIKO actually talked in the finale. She screamed no as he was being ripped away from her, which was absolutely just crushing, and it was such a moment that I didn't realize at first as she was screaming, but then it clicked in my head that, oh my god, that like she spoke in this entire time where she has not said a word throughout the entirety of this series. She finally spoke, and I thought that moment was incredibly impactful, and it was one of my favorites, I guess, cliffhanger moments at the end of this finale. And then you have Erin Moriarty as Annie January as Starlight in this season, and I like that they gave her the Spider-Man 2 treatment in this season with her not being able to use her abilities, so she has to kind of be a little more grounded. She's very, I guess, she's out of control in this season in a way that I found very interesting, especially when it came to the whole Firecracker situation that they added in this season, which Firecracker was a really great biting satire of a lot of the, you know, the right-wing political pundits that you see just on TV. That's another part of the show that was very exhausting for me because it felt extremely real. But to have these characters be tied together in their past, and to have a character that can really stand up against, against Starlight's character as a, I guess, mental force instead of just a physical force in this season, I thought was another great touch to add. But really, when she lost control and she went and attacked her on the stage, was one of those moments where I was just like, God, they really got to this character and they really broke her down to her lowest point that she's had in this series so far. That was really tough to watch. Although I do think that with her character, I don't think that her storyline was as in the forefront as some other people this season. But either way, I do still like Erin Moriarty in this role. I thought that she had a lot of fun things to do. I'm glad she got her powers at the very end. When you had the entire sequence where the boat falls from the sky and Hughie's kidnapped and she flies off into safety. So now she is going to be out there. She's going to be the one character that is kind of free to do whatever she wants to try to save the boys at the beginning of the next season, which I imagine is how that is all going to go down. So I'm glad she got her abilities back in the end of it. But in general, I thought that her role in this season was pretty good. Not my favorite, but it was still enjoyable. But then you have Hughie Campbell, who I thought was probably actually my favorite character this entire season. And again, if you watch my old videos of The Boys, you probably know that I hate Hughie. I did not like him at all in the first 2 seasons because he was always such a hypocrite. I hated how he, reacted to certain things. He was such a sympathetic character at first, but then he kind of turned and did all these terrible things. And just this character was so hateable. And I don't know why I hated this character so much at the beginning, but really in the past 2 seasons, specifically with this season, he went through so much trauma and so much just heartbreak throughout this entire thing. I thought his storyline with his dad in this season was completely unnecessarily cruel, but that is what The Boys does. It takes a storyline that you see, a father, going into a coma, and you have him trying to grapple with the death of his father and how close they were, and his mother coming into the picture, and the whole idea that his mother left, and his dad was able to raise him all the way from the beginning just by himself. And you have all these great storylines that you can see in other things. But what is The Boys thing to do? Well, you're gonna have his dad injected with V and go on this murder spree in this hospital, and then you have to have Hughie put him down in a very tragic way. You couldn't just let him die in his sleep. No, you had to do this whole tragic storyline that just makes him just so much more tragic. It make this entire story so much more tragic with how they handled that entire episode in this season, that I thought was entirely unnecessary, but it was very much The Boys. But no, of course you couldn't end there. You have to torture Hughie even more in this season. You have to swap out Starlight and have that whole thing happen with the Shifter character in this season, which I thought was even more disgusting and just awful, to put Hughie through that entire storyline, which was just, come on, just let this guy get some peace. But he had a great speech at the end of the season that's, violence is not the answer. That's not the direction that we can go. We need to try to, save these people. We can try to work with Neuman. I thought that his storyline with Neuman was actually pretty great this season because, of course, with Victoria Neuman, you have this character that is in the political side of this show that has been going down a dark path and, teaming up with Homelander, and is going down such a direction where it's very heartbreaking to see, especially with Hughie's perspective, knowing her when she was younger and having that bond that they had in those previous seasons, to see her go down this dark path and to see how Hughie was really the only person that she can reach out to try to get out of this situation, to try to save her, to try to redeem herself in the eyes of both Hughie and I guess the audience at large. And I did think that it was really great to see him have that speech to the boys and to try to convince them to, to have her try to help them take down Homelander, and to have that all go down the drain because Billy Butcher just couldn't handle it, and Jeffrey Dean Morgan got into his head, and he went into there and he killed Victoria Neuman in a way that was just really, really brutal. But to have her, even Victoria Neuman's character, go through that entire arc throughout this season of going down that dark path and then realizing that she has done some really terrible things, and to try to redeem herself, but to rip that away right when she completes that character arc, I thought was a great moment. But just in general, I think Hughie really went for it, but it was all worth it. All that pain was worth it to get that one speech in this finale that I thought was probably one of the most well-written things that Hughie has ever had to do in the show in general. But of course, you don't just have our returning cast members, you also have Susan Heyward as Sister Sage in this season. And when I, rank, I guess, my favorite storylines throughout this entire season, I'll get into Homelander here in a second, because obviously Homelander is always a highlight in this show. But then you have Hughie, who I thought was a giant standout this season, and also Sister Sage. She was a giant surprise for me in this series. And whenever you pair a character to Homelander. Every season that essentially gets a new person to be by his side. And I thought Sister Sage was a great addition because she's very different from everybody else that we've gotten so far, because usually you pair Homelander with the idiots of the world. You pair him with Stormfront, you pair him with, Soldier Boy or the Deep or Atron or whoever is going to do his bidding for him. He's always going to have idiots surrounding him. But when you pair him with somebody who is, written to be the smartest character ever, it's a very interesting dynamic to see her being, strong enough to go against Homelander in some ways, to, speak her mind and to be able to get away with it. That's a thing that you never get to see in this show. And I thought that they wrote her character extremely well. And, it's very hard to pull off a character that you say is extremely smart, because you're going to have everybody pick apart her plan to pieces to say, oh, this plan doesn't make sense. Oh, this writing is bad because of this, or that. And I'm sure there's some plot holes in this storyline, but I love the fact that she gave just enough information to Homelander to, I guess, manipulate him along with everybody else inside of her sphere to get them to do exactly what she wanted them to do. Because I think by the end of it, in the way the season ends with a new puppet of a president as the president of the United States being underneath Homelander, to have Homelander essentially be the president for the final season, I thought was a really great idea. And to have Sister Sage be so incredibly smart, to have everybody else just, falling into her trap, was a really great thing to see. And also the weird moments for Sister Sage, like her lobotomizing herself to, finally just not think for once and to be able to have fun and to let loose and to have that be her version of getting drunk and just making mistakes, I thought was a really fun and interesting character choice for her as well. And so I thought that she was phenomenal in this season. But then of course we have Antony Starr as Homelander in this show, who is always phenomenal. I think maybe he is a little bit closer to Homelander in real life than we initially thought. Maybe that plays into why he's so good in this role. But either way, Antony Starr was great in this season. I love the fact that this character and his main weakness of being a character who always wants to be liked by everybody else around him, I think that is his main weakness. When you take that weakness away, when he realizes that he doesn't need to be liked by everybody, he has all this power, and when you take that away from him, he can truly be let loose and to be set free and to do all these terrible things. Now you set him in a position where he's essentially above the president for the final season. He is leading everything. He has an army of soups by his, side that can do anything that he says that he wants them to do. He is in full power now, and it's completely terrifying, especially the fact that we're going through an election year with somebody that is very similar. He's very much based off of somebody in real life in the United States. I'm pretty sure you know who I'm talking about, and it is mortifying. And he's really the reason why I cannot binge this show, because it's too much for me. It is too cynical. The fact that they just breezed by his trial in the first episode, I kind of wish they went through the Homelander trial in the beginning of the season, but either way, in this world, he didn't get charged for anything. He got away with it. In our world, Trump did get, convicted of 34, felonies. But then you have him taking over the presidency in this season, and we don't know what's going to happen later on with our real world, election cycle, and that is just all very terrifying to see. And with this show being the biting satire that it is with this character, it is completely terrifying. I think my favorite thing about Homelander in this season is the fact that a lot of people apparently didn't realize that, this show was making fun of them with the way that it makes fun of right-wing pundits and the way that it makes fun of all these ideologies and how it compares Trump to, Homelander and all these different things. It's really funny to me that this season was, review bombed by those type of people. It's incredibly funny. The show also does make fun of basically everybody alongside the entirety of the political spectrum, and so it does make fun of the whole superhero thing. There's also a lot of jokes at the expense of Kevin Feige and left-wing media, and also the whole thing with A-Train's movie with Will Ferrell also, which I thought was a very funny joke to make in this show. But the fact that, you have a lot of left-wing people make these movies and have black actors star in it and say, oh, we're patting ourselves on the back for being an ally, but in reality, it's just a white savior movie that we're going to write off for tax purposes. All that stuff was also very funny to me as well. But just in general, this satire around this character, around this story, around Homelander, around all this stuff has always been great in The Boys, and I do not think that this show was a step down in that direction whatsoever. But really, I thought this season of The Boys was just as consistently good as every other season that we've had in this world so far, including the Gen V season, which I thought that Gen V was a pretty good show, and I like the fact that maybe Frenchie and KIMIKO are going to have a role in Gen V season 2, considering that the Gen V kids are the one who kidnapped them in this finale. And so I guess we'll see what happens there, and hopefully by the time we get to the 5th season, I'll be able to rewatch everything in preparation of that, because I do love this world. Like I said, binging it is going to be very hard for me, especially depending on how November goes in our real world. What is the state of the world going to be in 2 years? Who knows? I really hope it's all okay, but in general, I think the show has always been really well written. I just think it's a little bit too cynical and just a little bit too depressing to watch in our current political climate. And so I'm very curious to hear what you guys thought of the season in general, along with, what you think is going to happen in the final season. There are so many storylines that need to be wrapped up, and I think the way that the show had the cliffhanger at the end of this with basically everybody being kidnapped, have, Billy Butcher going off to do something with the virus. I don't know if he's going to go after Ryan or if he's going to go after somebody else. I don't know who else could be his target besides Ryan, which is completely heartbreaking. So I guess we're going to see what they're going to do with that. You have Annie flying off. You have everybody else being kidnapped. You have the Gen V kids taking over Frenchie and KIMIKO. So who knows if they're going to play a role in Gen V Season 2. And so there's a lot of things that we can play with in the world of The Boys before we get into that final season. But I really don't know how they're going to take out Homelander, but they have to. It's the final season. I cannot wait to see how they're able to pull that off, and I really hope they stick the landing because, again, this show has been consistently good for 4 seasons. It's been consistently depressing for 4 seasons. I really hope we get an ending that is satisfying to make me not be entirely depressed, but just depressed enough to be satisfied for a final season of The Boys. So those are going to be my thoughts on The Boys Season 4. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And of course, if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like on the video and subscribe to see more reviews just like this. I also just wrapped up my finale review for The Acolyte. So if you want to hear my thoughts on that show as well, go check that out here on the channel along with, my Long Legs review. I also did a podcast with Big Ken Talks where we're talking about horror, about, the landscape of, I guess, movie reviews in general and the negativity on YouTube as well. So you can check out that podcast. I had a lot of fun with that conversation with him as well. And again, leave a like, comment down below, subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one, and I hope to see you all in my next one.